what advice could you give for someone who is starting out? I'm in the process of setting up an LLC, and I've identified some really great properties in my market.
Cool. So I think first thing I'd say is the Tim Ferriss is ringing in my head right now, because what I would recommend when we ask questions, so this I'm not going to directly answer it yet, but I will. What I recommend when we ask questions is to be more defined in how we ask these questions. For example, what advice would you recommend for someone just getting started? It's tough to answer that question. It's tough to answer that question. And I didn't mention this earlier, but the individual who asked this question actually emailed me before.
Okay.
And it was a very long email. And I didn't know what to say to this very long email because there wasn't a specific question. And so I actually replied to her, and I said, can you actually let me know what specifically you'd like me to answer for you? And they came back with a question. And so first thing is make sure we're asking good questions. And how we ask good questions is we clearly define what we're looking for, and the recipient of the question knows what success looks like for once they answer it. I remember Tim asked, when he was starting out, he asked a really successful entrepreneur about a life choice or something he was trying to make, like, what do you think I should do here whenever he was trying to make a career choice or something, and the guy replied by saying, I don't know what you want me to say, like, I'm not sure how to handle that. I mean, so that's my first comment. But as far as suggestions for how to get started for starting out, I always like, because that was the question, right?
Yeah, it seems like what advice you give someone that's starting out, and it seems like it's just a general question.
Well, and I can give a fairly general answer.
Yeah.
We, as apartment syndicators, as multifamily syndicators, what we need to know is how to match up money with the deal. Pretty simple stuff. We need to match up the money that either our money or a portion of our money, regardless if you're raising money or not, it's either we need money and we need to match it up with a good deal. So in order to do that, in order to match up money and the deal, we have to be able to attract money, whether it's our own money or other people's, and we have to be able to identify good deals. Therefore, from the money standpoint, we need to, what I recommend getting to get started? Well, I recommend initially you don't focus on the money, you focus on finding good deals. And how you find good deals is that you know what a good deal looks like. Because we have to be able to be educated, we have to be able to be aware of how to underwrite deals, of how to talk the talk, how to build our teams. And once we have that in place, once we have the foundation, then we can start talking to investors. And once we have the investors aligned, once we have generated interest, peak curiosity generated interest from the investors, then we go find a deal. So first you establish the foundation, make sure we know how to look at markets, what to look for. With markets, by the way, it's jobs, it's job diversity, and it's supply and demand, basically. Those are the three things. How to underwrite deals. What type of business model are we going after? Is it more Class A apartment communities, which likely it isn't. It's probably, as someone starting out, probably Class C, maybe D, if you're brave enough. I buy B apartment communities, but initially I was buying C. But you'll find that people usually evolve or level up from C to B as they get going, because the capital expenses from a Class C that are supposed to be non-reoccurring magically somehow reoccur over and over and over. And once we have that done, then we can start the process of actually getting the deal. But if we don't have the foundation, so if we're not listening to podcasts like this and others, if we're not reading books, watching YouTube videos, and meeting with real life individuals in person, then we're not prepared yet to get the money or the deal. We have to get the foundation established first, and then start working on the money and the deal.
So this is not going to be a very, specific question yet, but would you recommend that there's a period of time that someone goes through, like a mandatory minimum type of deal, where it's like you should educate yourself for this amount of time before you even start looking to buy deals or asking other people for money? And the reason I ask that is because, especially when you're dealing with other people's money and large apartment deals, if you don't really know what you're talking about and you go to a broker and start talking with them, they'll be able to realize that. Or if you go to ask someone for money, you don't know what you're doing, they're gonna be like, well, of course I'm not gonna give you money. So would you say that there's, I guess, a amount of time that someone needs to spend first, just strictly focusing on building that foundation, or is it kind of a case by case basis, depending on an infinite amount of other variables?
I wouldn't say there's a specific amount of time, because we all progress at different speeds, and there are way too many variables to isolate and then determine amount of time. However, I will say that there are specific things that you have to have in place. One of the things, like I mentioned, is build the foundation, but we also have to build a brand, because I know one challenge that I had starting out was I was a vice president of an advertising agency in New York City. I mean, what type of perception is that compared to a multifamily syndicator? I mean, I had to shift the perception of me being someone who is in advertising to someone who is a multifamily syndicator. And so there are milestones along the way, but as far as how long that takes, it's different for everyone. I have a client, he was 22, I think, at the time, 21 or 22, and he raised over $300,000 in 6 months and bought a 30-unit apartment building in Virginia while living in New York City. But then there are others, who, myself included, who took longer. Mine was about 8 months. So, the nature of commercial real estate in general, I mean, it takes a couple months at minimum. If you're just going after it full time, looking at deals to find something at minimum.
Yeah.
And that depends on a lot of factors as well. And then once you find something, then it's 60, 90 days to close. So that period of time, there's 6 months right there. And then there's a lot, depending on what your starting point is, there's a lot leading up to getting there.
Yeah.
So there is ramp up time, and this is by no means a quick get up and running type of business. There's a long lead time. I think with wholesaling, there would be a much quicker get out of the gate, start making a buck approach, but the upside isn't as great, in my opinion, to wholesaling, and it's not as scalable. Whereas I think with multifamily syndication, the more apartment buildings you purchase, the easier it is, quite frankly, to scale, because you can bring on the right team members and and you're able to scale a lot faster, in my opinion, once you reach the tipping point. Whereas wholesaling, I think you've got to block and tackle along the way.
Yeah, and I can tell from your business, you've been able to systematize it so much better over time. Like at first it was probably a little more difficult, and then as time went on, you got better and better at it. Whereas now it's like you're pumping out deals constantly now. At least what it seems like to me. So
yep,
perfect.